Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. For those new here, my name's Nicki. I'm an author and editor and I post videos here on YouTube about writing, editing, reading and all the other things I love. We're here today for the books side of things. As you can see on the banner below, it's time to wrap up what I've been reading in February. So let me move that out the way. Now, I've been reading quite a few books. For the whole year so far, I'm up to I think about 65. So I'm absolutely smashing my Goodreads goal. In terms of my challenges and things I'm doing this year, I haven't added anything new to the World Reading Challenge this month. That is something I need to look at a bit more as we move through the year. But at present, I'm kind of busy catching up with books I got for Christmas and birthday and things in December, ones I bought for myself with Christmas money in the new year. So once I've caught up with those, I'll start investigating a few authors from some of the countries I haven't read yet to kick a few more off those list, that list, during 2020. In terms of my personal NJM book challenge, I have crossed a couple more off this month, so that's good. I'm making excellent progress with that. I've still got the 5 gaps. Is it 5? Yes, 5 gaps to fill where I don't have books lined up. But for all the others, even if I haven't read them yet, I've got a book sitting here ready. So I'll be getting through some more of those as well. So just sticking with what I have read in February, I'll kick us off. I'm just going to go down through my list in my bullet journal. As you can see, I'll just cross them off as we go, so I know I've talked about them. I'm going to start with Kokoro by Natsumi Soseki. So this is a book I got for my birthday, and it's a classic of Japanese literature. Soseki is a pretty major Japanese modern author or early modern author. For me, Kokoro was 5 stars. Kokoro means heart. And this was a really fascinating character-driven tale, really. I think the characters were the absolute pinnacle. He does a really wonderful job of building character, of giving us a sense of 3 dimensions about them as well. It's perhaps I ought to start off just by saying it's a story between 2 characters, essentially. Neither of them are actually really named. The narrator calls the other character Sensei. He's an older man with whom our narrator is fascinated. And I don't think it's sexual. I think it's more mental. But and over the time of the story, he comes to understand more about Sensei's past. And this is a book that looks at cultural shifts between the generations, sort of the Meiji going into the more modern era. It looks at this kind of age divide, but also different points of view on guilt, on love. I'm trying to describe it in a way that doesn't spoil the story, which is sometimes difficult. This is just a really brilliant piece. The writing flows beautifully. I loved everything about it. I was keen to turn the page each time, and I highly recommend it. If you haven't read any Japanese literature from the 20th century, Soseki is a really great author to start with. So I'll stop rambling because I feel I'm rambling about this one because I'm just trying to describe it in a way that doesn't spoil the story, and it's hard. But it's definitely, if you are into books from the early 20th century period with a sort of psychological bent, then give it a try. Next up for me, Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, which I read years and years ago. I didn't have a copy on my shelf, so I had it on my wish list. It was bought for me for my birthday, so I just gave it another quick read. I'm not going to talk about it too much. It seems even bizarrer now that I'm older, actually, than I remember it feeling when I was younger. But it is such a fun and engaging, cute story. Next up, sticking with the classics, actually, another book I got for birthday, Christmas back in January, In a Glass Darkly by Sheridan Fanu. So these are essentially supernatural, I'm going to call them thrillers rather than horrors. They're kind of supernatural mystery tales in some way. They're a collection of short stories, about 5 of them, including Camilla. I'd already read Camilla, which is Fanu's vampire story. The others, though, were new to me, and I did enjoy them. They're not going to strike fear in the hearts of modern readers who are used to much more gruesome and scary things, but they're intriguing little tales of the supernatural world. So if that sounds like your sort of thing, give it a try. For me, this was a 4-star read. Next up, The Strange Laws of Old England by Nigel Cawthorne. So this is a book, it's non-fiction, anecdotal mainly, and talking about some of the laws that used to exist in England, as the title would suggest, often quite bizarro ones, things that we wouldn't consider even in our wildest dreams nowadays. But amazingly, some of them weren't lifted until fairly late on, like 1960s, 70s in some cases. But weirdo laws. So if you're into history and quirky history, it's definitely one I would recommend. It was a 4-star read for me. Next up, probably my most disappointing read of the month, unfortunately, The Testament of Loki by Joanne M. Harris. I adored The Gospel of Loki, which is the book that precedes this one. That was an absolutely brilliant retelling of Norse myth with Loki as the narrator. It was quirky, it was fun, it was witty. Loki came across absolutely wonderfully as a character. And I came to this sequel expecting more of the same. And what I got really felt like fan fiction to me. The story is suddenly transported into the modern times. After Ragnarok, Loki is trying to find a way back into the world. He's kind of stuck in this weird dimensional realm. And he does so through a video game by inhabiting the body of a young woman with a lot of problems of her own. And he meets up with Odin and everyone again who are also inhabiting other people's bodies, and they're all trying to get their own lives back. And there's a bit of a fight going on over who's going to get to the important artifact first. But really, as I said, it felt like fan fiction. It felt like someone had just wanted to write a story about Loki inhabiting this young woman's body, and all that wit, all the humor, all the quirkiness that had made that first book so great was missing. Loki didn't come across as well as a character. He was probably because he was sharing so much screen time with this woman whose problems we were meant to care about, even though we never met her before. And she was just kind of felt like a Mary Sue in some ways, honestly. This was 2.5 stars for me. The story and the plot and action weren't unenjoyable, but it just wasn't what I was expecting. And it was so different from the first book that I don't know how you could really link them together in any way. So for me, that was a real letdown, because I'd been looking forward to reading it and I'd been waiting to read it. And when I finally did, I was just so disappointed. Next up, Beren and Luthien by Tolkien. So this is another of the books edited by Christopher Tolkien. And for this, I've given this 5 stars. I think it is a really nice presentation of the Beren and Luthien story. However, if you're coming to it having already read all the history of Middle-earth, the Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales, then you'll already know the story. This is just gathering all those Beren and Luthien threads into one book. And as such, I think it's a nice collection. As I said, it won't be new material, really, if you've already read all those others. But it is nice to have that storyline all together. And if you're a fan of Tolkien and you are collecting all the books about Tolkien and about Middle-earth, then it's a good one to add to your collection. Next, Pan's Labyrinth by Funke and Del Toro. So this is a novelization of the film. I am an absolutely huge fan of Pan's Labyrinth, the film. It's one of my all-time favourite films. And as such, I approached this book with some trepidation, but also a lot of excitement. And for me, it was a 4-star read. I think it told the story well. It included all the beats, all the things we'd want to see. It also had some additional material looking at the background behind the building of the labyrinth and the search for the princess, which you don't get in the film. However, perhaps it's because I know the film so well, but there was no excitement, no on the edge of my seat feel about this book. And I think it didn't quite manage to capture that magic of the film. If I was given a choice in this regard, I would choose the film over the book, absolutely, without question. It's going to be an enjoyable read if you're a fan of the film. And even if you haven't seen the film, you don't necessarily have to have watched it in order to enjoy this book. And perhaps you would enjoy the book more if you haven't seen the film. It's one of those situations, I think. But as I said, 4 stars. It wasn't quite as magical as the film, but it's still a good read. Moving on, next up is a NetGalley read, Hearts of Oak by Eddie Robson. And this was a 3.5-star read for me. Now, the premise of this story is quite an interesting one. It's setting at a city, and the city is continually growing, and there seems to be this obsession with keep building and stretching and expanding the city as much as possible. People in the city are behaving a little bit strangely, and the king is worried about what's going on, so he spends his time conferring with his best friend and closest advisor, who happens to be a talking cat. One of the chief architects is alerted to the fact that something strange is going on, and she starts questioning what's happening, and a mystery begins to evolve that she's finding that there's some strange stuff going on and that the cat is probably playing a part in this somehow. I can't really say more than that without spoiling it. So it's kind of a bit sci-fi, a bit fantasy, with a bit of a twist going on as well. And I really liked the premise, the story idea, but for me, I just felt there could have been more to it than there was in the end. The ending particularly felt a little bit rushed. And I kind of had this big build-up, and I was expecting something amazing, and it just gave me average. So that's why it's 3.5 stars. But there's definitely some, it's quirky, it's different. If you are looking for a sci-fi fantasy read that's easygoing and just something a little bit out there, then I recommend giving it a try. Bear with me a second. I just need to have a little sip of my tea. Which is still a little bit hot. But now let's continue. I received an ARC from Pan Macmillan Australia of Ember Queen by Laura Sebastian. And this is the final book in the Ash Princess trilogy. And it's a 4-star read for me. I'd say it's a good conclusion to the story. For me, the first book was the best. That I really loved the interplay between Cern and the Ash Princess in that story. However, as the book's gone on, I've kind of started to lose interest in that a little bit. I'm glad the love triangle that was threatened in book 1 never came to pass. So that was good for me. But it's enjoyable. If you like YA fantasy, all the things that you'd expect from a YA fantasy are in this story. And as YA fantasy goes, it was a fun plot, a good idea. I liked the characters. And it's a strong trilogy overall. But for me, that first book was the absolute best one. And the other 2 have been just very good. But if you enjoy YA fantasy, it is one I can recommend as a series. Next up are books I bought myself with money I got for Christmas. There's 3 of them, so I will crack straight on. I'm actually making a point this year of trying to finish off the books I haven't read yet from Haruki Murakami and Milan Kundera. I am down literally to the last handful in each case. I think I've got 1 or 2 Kundera left and 3 or 4 Murakami, and then I'm done. I'm up to date with them. So I read a couple more of the Murakamis and the Kunderas, and I'm going to start with Men Without Women by Haruki Murakami, which was a 5-star read for me. This is a collection of short stories. I really enjoy Murakami's short story collections. And as with all his writing, it's really easy reading, but with a depth of thought beneath the seemingly simple prose. And these stories are all based around, as the title would suggest, men who are in some ways on their own, without women in their lives, or with women on the periphery of their lives, perhaps is a better way of saying it. And I've thought these were enjoyable tales. Each story is beautifully rendered, perfectly paced, as with all Murakami's work. And if you're a fan of his, you'll love these. If you're new, I think you could start with the short stories. If you're new to Murakami, I'd probably suggest Kafka on the Shore as a first read. But definitely, if you're already a fan, you're going to find plenty to love in this collection. Sticking with Murakami, I read The Wind, Pinball, Duology, which are actually his first books. And it's interesting. He wrote these in the 70s. They're very early writing for him, but you still really get a sense of his narrative style. It's not that we don't recognize his writing in these stories, even though they're very early on. I think they maybe lacked a bit of the magic of that he developed later. there's a hint of magical realism, but not as much as he uses in later books. But they are still really engaging stories, really great psychological studies of these characters. As I said before, done in this seemingly simple way, but with actually a lot of depth behind it. So again, if you're a fan of Murakami, I highly recommend checking them out. If you're new to his work, I don't think it's the best place to start, but you'll definitely want to come back and read them afterwards once you've done The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle, Kraftgott on the Shore, and some of those other big titles. And for Milan Kundera, I got The Farewell Waltz. And now this is another early work, like the previous one I just mentioned of Murakami. And again, as with the Murakami book, you definitely still get a sense that this is Kundera's writing. It doesn't feel different from his style. It's perhaps not quite as detailed and cleverly realized as some of his later stories, but there's still a lot going for it. It's an interesting tale, again, very character-driven, a study of these people's thoughts, feelings, what's driving them to make these choices they're making. And there's a lot of interesting themes going on in this work. So again, I don't recommend it for people new to Kundera. I'd start with one of the bigger, better well-known stories, such as The Unbearable Lightness of Being, or I don't know, maybe The Joke. But definitely, if you're already a fan or you've read a few and want to try something else by him, Farewell Waltz is one I recommend. And both Pinball and Farewell Waltz were 4-star reads for me. Also during February, I got caught up finally with Platinum End by Ohba and Obata. So this is a manga. I'm up to volume 10 now. Volume 11 comes out, I think, in a couple of months' time. So I'm now caught up and I'll be reading as volumes come out from here on. Platinum End, I'm not going to do a big full review of it because I am still in the middle of the story, as it were. But it's a story by the people who wrote Death Note. It's a fantasy story. There's candidates to become God. Each of them has an angel assigned to them. But some of the candidates are not really interested in the competition. Others are taking it so seriously they're trying to kill off their competitors. So there's a lot of action. There's a bit of battle manga that goes on style in it because they are having these fights. But it's also interesting psychological piece as well in the way Death Note was, and there's a lot of twists and things coming in the story as well. So I'm really excited to see where it's going to go as we move into volumes 11 and 12 during this year. Next up, I got an arc from the author of The Celestial Assignment by Theresa Braun. Now, Theresa Braun is generally a horror writer. This book is kind of flagged as horror, but to me it really wasn't. It was more of a fantasy, perhaps with a slight thriller edge. And it's based around a guy who's just become an angel, and he's been given this assignment to be a kind of guardian angel to this woman. And it's a kind of psychological character study in some ways, because during his time in this role, he begins to understand a bit more of himself, what he was like when he was alive as a human, and the things he did that, looking back, maybe he shouldn't have done. So I gave it 4 stars because I thought it was interesting in its way. As I said, it's not really horror. So it's, if you go into expecting more of her usual style story, it's something a little bit different. But it's a fun read. It's just a very quick short story / short novella, really. So if you just want a quick fantasy angel-based read with a little bit of darkness here and there, then you could check it out. Going briefly back to Ohba and Obata, and Death Note, they released in February a one-shot in Shonen Jump, which was a new version of Death Note, just an 86-87 page completed story of a new Death Note coming to Earth in the modern times. What I really loved about this, and I'm really thankful to Viz Media, who put up the English translation for free on their website so you can read it, because I thought otherwise I wouldn't be able to get hold of a copy. I liked how they've taken Death Note and said all the things that Light did in the original story. You know, we're talking how long ago? 20 years? No, not quite. 2006 or so, I think it was out. So, a fairly long time ago we're talking about. And the way that the Death Note worked then wouldn't work so well now with the rise of social media, more CCTV footage. He wouldn't be able to get away with the killings he got away with. So they've kind of taken that into account and done a version of Death Note of someone trying to use it in the modern era, incorporating Twitter and various things. I thought it was really good. It worked well. It was great to see Rurik back as a character. I liked our new owner of the Death Note. He was great fun. The ending took me a bit by surprise. I didn't quite expect it to go the way it did, but it worked. And overall, I had great fun with this. It was a 4-star read for me. Not quite as brilliant as the original, but really, really good sort of new iteration of it. We're coming towards the end, just a few to go. From the library, I read a couple of cookbooks. I've been trying to think about better ways of doing my lunch at work, essentially. I get bored of sandwiches and then I end up spending money buying food at lunchtime instead, which I really want to avoid doing. I want to be able to take my own food. And I thought maybe bento is the way to go for me, because that variety of different things rather than just a sandwich and that's it. So I was trying to get a bit of inspiration. So first up, I read the Just Bento Cookbook by Ito Makiko. This was a 3-star read for me. In fact, I think I'll talk about both these together. I'll mention first the other one is called Simply Bento by Yuko and Noriko. And that one's 4-star. And the reason I've sort of been a bit hesitant about the stars is because for me personally, what I wanted to get out of them, I didn't find them as useful as I'd hoped. A lot of these recipes involve you doing quite elaborate, almost cooking dinners. And I mean, they're saying you can do some of it the night before and things, but it's like, well, I have to come home from work, cook our main dinner, and then cook a second dinner for me to take to lunch tomorrow. I was really looking for inspiration and ideas, something that I could put together in the morning within 15 minutes kind of thing, 20 minutes max. So a lot of these ideas just weren't going to work for me. Some of them involve masses of ingredients, and I just want something quick and easy and simple to take. The Simple Bento one, the second one, gave a slightly higher star because that did give a few more ideas for stuff you could prepare in advance, how you could preserve stuff and things like that. But I was kind of a little bit put off because it is all this big cooking, and I think I need to think outside the box a bit more and just come up with ideas of stuff that I can easily put in that's just little nibbles. That's going to be a balanced meal, but without a lot of prep. So moving back, from NetGalley, I borrowed Manga Drawing Deluxe, or I received Manga Drawing Deluxe by Yazawa Nao. And this was a 5-star read for me. Over the last 9 months or so, I've read a fair number of manga drawing manuals, if you like, since I decided to take up that style as well as my realistic portraiture. And I've probably read between 10 and 15 books. And definitely this is the best one I've come across so far. It was really awesome. It covers everything from anatomy and drawing figures to thinking about backgrounds, screen tones, special effects, and how to put together a story, storyboard, concept, pacing. And it's all done through a comic in a way. It's like a sort of little manga story or manga story you get as you're reading, because the girl and boy protagonists are wanting to learn to draw manga, and these little manga elves come and show them all these techniques and tips. So it was great fun in the way it was presented as well. But lots of really good information, great examples, visually very pleasing and inspiring reading. And when this book releases next month, it's on my book depository wish list. I would really like to get a copy to keep on my shelf, because I think it's one that I would find useful, that I'd want to keep referring back to. And finally, our last book for the month is one I picked up in the cheap bookstore in town for $6. And it's The Thirst for Love by Mishima Yukio. So Mishima is another very well-known modern, sort of 1950s or so, Japanese author. I've had a couple of his works sitting on my book depository wish list, but I hadn't gotten around to reading any yet. So when I saw this one in the cheap store, I thought I should definitely get it. I really loved this book. It was a 5-star read for me. It's a story of a woman whose husband's died. She's ended up kind of being drawn into this relationship with her father-in-law. But at the same time, she's fallen in love with one of their servants. And the book is about her dealing with that passion, the trauma it brings her, and the tragic events that take place when she finally decides to act on this desire for him. Again, I don't want to spoil a thing, so I'm not going to go too deep into the story other than that. But I would say that Etsuko, the main woman, main female character. It's absolutely beautifully drawn. We really get a great sense of who she is psychologically. We see her changing during the novel as she reacts to these different events and things taking place. And all up, it was a really brilliant character portrayal. I mean, I've read some really, as you can hear from the fact I keep mentioning it, I've read some really great character-driven works this month, which I've enjoyed so much because I really love getting deep into the character's head. Action and plot-driven stories are great too, but sometimes I just really like to get really deep in with the character. And a lot of the books I've read this month have done that, and this is one of them. So if you like Japanese literature, contemporary-ish Japanese literature, I mean, we're talking, 70 years or so ago now, but reasonably contemporary, I would definitely give it a go. There's a slight darkness to the story. It's a bit of a tragic tale in some ways, but it's absolutely fascinating reading, and I was really bowled over and desperate to turn the page, and I'm definitely going to start trying to get some more of Mishima's books in the future. So that was my wrap up for February. I've got, I think, about 20 books still sitting on my TBR pile. I still had about 15, 16 from my Christmas haul and from gifts and ones I bought myself. Plus, I've just received in the last 2 days 5 more from NetGalley. And I've got a few coming from the library that should be arriving soon. So I've got a lot to read, but I shall crack on with some more of them during March. And I look forward to sharing my thoughts on those with you at the end of next month. I will end there for today, but I'll be back again, as always, very soon with another vlog. In fact, if you come over to my channel on Sunday, I'm doing a kind of overview of Black Butler, the manga, and all its adaptations. So I do hope you'll check out that video then. It will go live on Sunday morning. It's scheduled on YouTube already. So I will end there. I will see you all again very soon. Bye for now, everyone.